Rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All right, inshallah, we'll get started with this session with Dr. Suzy Ismail. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله لا نبي بعده أما بعد ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. My name is Nada Adiba, and the title of today's session is How to Develop a Good Relationship with Your Children. Our speaker for today is Dr. Suzy Ismail. She is the founder and head communication consultant at Cornerstone, a faith-based communication center that focuses on youth, identity, and relationship building. She previously taught over 15 years in the communications department at Rutgers University and DeVry University. Dr. Ismail is the author of several books, including Modern Muslim Marriage, 9 to 5, When Muslim Marriage Fails, and several other publications. She specializes in a range of communication lectures and diversity workshops at major corporations, programs, and events. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Suzy Ismail.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونشكره ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونشهد إن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. السلام عليكم. So I don't want to interrupt those of you who are eating, so please feel free to continue. And inshallah, as you continue to feed the stomach, we will also try to feed the mind and the heart, bi'iznillah. So for those of you who were in the program earlier this morning, you were in my session earlier this morning, I spoke to you a little bit about how the topics that I've been asked to speak about today, the 3 different sessions, all build upon each other, and that they correlate very closely to the stages of tarbiyah. So for those who were not able to come to the morning session, I'm going to give a brief recap of what we touched upon and then move into the second stage. So the 3 topics that I was asked to speak about here is, the first one was preserving the Islamic identity in our youth. The second one is building better relationships between parents and children. And the third one, which will be later on this evening, is empowering our youth. Now, the reason why these 3 topics really build upon each other is that we see that concept of identity being formulated in children largely at that foundational age, which is considered the stage of security. And that's from ages 0 to 7. And so we went into quite a bit detail of what that entails in the process of tarbiyah in the age 0 to 7 in order to foster an identity that is rooted in a sense of security, that is rooted in a love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the love that is developed for the parents, and through the parents conveying that love in a way that is helpful and not harmful for both dunya and akhirah. So now as we move into the second stage, we are going to speak about that process of building better relationships and how it coincides with the second stage of tarbiyah, which is the stage that we spoke of as being the age of discipline, from the ages of 8 to 14. And it is in this stage of 8 to 14 that we talked about how the child often begins to challenge the parent. And we had a question from the audience even in the first session about an 8-year-old who begins to talk back, who feels like she has an opinion and her opinion needs to be heard. And this largely occurs because in this stage of tarbiyah, in this process of tarbiyah, usually the child is beginning to have that sense of independence, where they feel that being with the parent or following the lead of the parent is no longer the priority. But instead, they look to their friends, they look to the social atmosphere, they look to movies and books and songs in order to better understand the world around them and to understand their position in the world. So in this stage, in the tweens and the preteens, age 8 to 14, we see that this is the stage where setting boundaries is critical. And again, it's the age where children may rebel and fight against the word no, but really they need to hear it. And subconsciously, they want to hear it because the boundaries make them feel safe and secure again. It is also the stage where speaking the same language as our children is very critical. Understanding them and showing them that we understand them and giving back that reciprocal respect that we talked about that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam would show Fatima radiallahu anha. And we also see that this is the stage where there are intense hormonal changes and where awareness of gender differences begins. And we're going to touch upon a little bit today in this section about some of the gender fluidity, gender non-binary approaches, and some of the conversations that your children in this stage are most likely hearing and having in school, in social media, in popular culture. And we're going to delve into that topic a bit more in depth in the evening talk as well. All right, so Bismillah. So in the morning, we did a little exercise in which I asked the audience to stand up, and I asked them to do different activities with their hands. And at one point, I placed my hand on my cheek, and I asked the audience to place their hand on their chin. About half of the audience placed their hand on their cheek instead of their chin. And we talked about how the nonverbal message conveys a greater meaning or a greater sense of understanding quite frequently over the verbal. And that what we see, we often interpret as being more authentic or more real than just what we hear. And that our children capture and understand the world around them in a very similar way. And so many researchers show that there are indications that in terms of how we make meaning of the world, how we understand the world around us, and how our children understand the world is really contingent, about 65% on nonverbals and 35% on verbals. So again, when we are speaking to our children, and we might say something, like the child is saying, hey, Mom, Dad, I got an A on this test. And we might say, okay, good job. Saying, okay, good job, the terms, the content itself may be like, oh, this is a positive compliment. But how we say it carries more meaning. So if we're saying, oh, good job, they're going to hear that tone in our voice. If we're saying, good job, they're going to hear that tone in our voice. If we're saying, okay, good job, good job, good job, good job, they're going to hear that tone in our voice. And so modulating our tones, understanding the impact of our inflection, of our pitch, knowing the importance of what our facial expressions are saying and our body language can be the key to better understanding our children and communicating with them. Now, I mentioned in that first slide, in terms of how we bring about a better relationship, I mentioned how important it is for us to speak the same language as our children. Now, the term language is often used interchangeably, even in terms of translations of certain ayahs in the Quran. But there is more to that term that can be captured in the term tongue rather than languages. Now, last night in the singles program that we were doing for the matrimonial section of Muqtamar, we talked a little bit about an important verse that is often linked to the understanding of the marriage relationship. And it's the verse that's known as the marriage verse in Surah Al-Rum. It's verse 21. And it's the verse that reminds us that our marriages are meant to be a place of tranquility. لِتَسْكَنُوا إِلَيْهَا, a place of sukoon, of rest, of catching our breath, and a place of sukoon that is created in that sense of tranquility and serenity because it is built with mawadda wa rahma, with care and mercy. But often when we look at the marriage verse that precedes, the wedding invitations that's recited at the beginning of the marriages of the nikah, we tend to lose sight of the verses that surround that beautiful verse. And those verses are so critically important because they give us the guide not just to marriage, but the guide to building a family and the relationships that we can maintain within our family. And when we look at these ayat, when we look at these verses 20 to 24, we see first of all in each of those verses Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding us وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, and from his signs, from his miraculous signs. And the next verse again begins وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, and the verse that follows it وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, and the verse after that وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, and the verse after that وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, because it is so critical for us to recognize the miraculous signs that exist not only within the marriage but within the family relationship, and within the way that that relationship unfolds between husband and wife, between parent and children, between child and parent. And so we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us preceding that marriage verse, and you can look at the translations of it. We see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us that we have been created from dust, that we have been created from dust, and that we were dispersed as human beings throughout the earth. So prior to talking to us about the marriage and the connection of human beings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to us about our differences, about how we have been created in a different way, and that none of us are the same as each other. And then he reminds us of that connection between man and woman in that marriage relationship. And it is followed with a reminder that another of his signs is that there is a diversity of languages and colors. Now again, in most translation, and I put tongues in brackets, in most translations you will see the translation of that verse as differences in your languages and in your colors. But when we go back to the verse itself and we look at the term that is used in that verse, and on 30, and I don't think I have a laser to point to it, but when you see where it says chapter 30, verse 22, we see the term that is used by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his infinite wisdom is وَإِخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتَكُمْ. And أَلْسِنَتَكُمْ, for those of you who understand Arabic, comes from the root word of lisan. And the lisan is the tongue. And the reason why this is incredibly important is because differences in tongues are different than the differences in languages. And we see again in each of these verses something that is incredibly beautiful. At the end of each of the verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us to think. So in verse 21, we are reminded, لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, those who give thought. And then in verse 22, we are reminded again of those that remember. And then we're reminded in verse 23, لِقَوْمٍ يَسْمَعُونَ, those who listen, those who hear. And then we're reminded again in verse 24 of the miracles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in those لِقَوْمٍ يَعْقَلُونَ. So we are reminded of several parts of the body essentially here. The aql, يعقلون, is the mind. The sama' is the hearing, the listening, right? And the lisan is the tongue. These are essentially the parts of communication that those who study communication spend years trying to understand. And here in these 4 critical verses in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is laying out for us the foundation of a solid family. The foundation of what it means to build a family that is a family that seeks the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, why is it important to recognize the difference between tongues and languages? You know, as we raise our children, and particularly again, we're looking at that stage, that middle stage from 8 to 14, we often will hear them speaking to one another, texting one another, engaging in conversations with one another, with these terminologies that are so hard to understand. So it'll be like, LMFAPQRS, and that's like, oh, I was laughing, or LOL, or I know my kids tell me now, Mom, these are so outdated, but this was a thing at one time. BRB was be right back, and see you later with an 8. TGIF, I don't know if they still say that, but the difference here is that our children are still using the English language, but the tongue with which they're speaking is different. And we see it, in the morning we did an exercise where I had mentioned the word tree. And when I asked several people in the audience to identify what tree they had thought of, I got 3 different
Beliau
answers
ini
from 3
ahlinya
different
mengusir
people.
jin.
We got oak tree and cherry tree and palm tree and Christmas tree. And we see that is because when we communicate with each other, we may be using the same language, but we're using a different tongue. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His infinite wisdom in Surah Al-Rum reminds us that we've been created from different parts of the earth. We've been dispersed and that we
Beliau
have
ini
different
ahlinya
colors and
mengusir
different
jin.
tongues. And this can exist even within the family. Now, I remember,
Makanya,
a while
anaknya
back when my youngest,
Nah, biasa
Layla,
nenek
who's,
tuh
I
yang
think,
paling suka
helping
kayak
make
gitu.
sandwiches right now.
Ya kan juga.
When she was maybe in about first grade or second grade, she would walk around the house and she would always be like, OMA, OMA, OMA. And so, being the cool and hip mom that I thought I was, I would never ask my kids when they'd use new terminology, but I would always run to urbandictionary.com and I type in the letters and then I would start using it. And then it stopped being cool real fast. So, when I started telling my kids like, oh, that's so ratchet, or, ooh, that outfit's on fleek, they'd be like, okay, just no. And then they would stop using it. But I went to urbandictionary.com and I type in OMA and I'm like, what is this OMA? It's not coming up. So finally I had to ask her and I told her, Layla, what is OMA? She's like, Mama, it's oh my Allah. Everyone says it. And because, of course, she was in an Islamic school and her friends all, ascribed to the concept of Allah, alhamdulillah, that was what became her language or her tongue. And so we see this consistently, and if we think back to our own childhoods, we will recall that there were times when we had our own tongues as well with our parents. And again, I don't know if any of you are children of the 80s, but I remember in the 80s, there was a song by Michael Jackson called Bad. And it was really cool to call everything that you liked bad. So my sisters and I would walk around the house and would be like, oh, that's so bad, oh, that's bad, And my parents would get upset and they'd be like, if it's good and you like it, call it good. If it's bad and you don't like it, call it bad. Don't call it bad if it's really good. And it was a sense of inclusion that we would have among our peers, a sense of getting into that stage that we talked about where there is a difference from how you view your parents and how you view society and the world around you. And as our youth in this stage are trying to develop their identities further, are trying to understand who they are and what their place in the world is, they will utilize tongues that may sometimes make us feel very much excluded. They may utilize ways of communicating. I mean, it took me forever to learn Facebook, and then it just wasn't cool anymore. They will use things, figuring out what a streak was on Snapchat, or understanding how to tweet, or what a picture looks like on Pinterest. These are all elements of a difference in tongue that our younger generations are experiencing. That as the older generation, it can sometimes feel so hard to keep up. But again, if we were to tell our children, look both ways before you cross the street, but they had never seen us cross the street, our warning would not carry great weight, because the response would be like, psh, you never cross the street. How would you know that I have to look both ways? Now, a lot of times with social media, a lot of times with the avenues of communication that our children now use, their response to us when we say, don't post pictures of yourself on Snapchat, their response is like, psh, you don't know. Like, how would you know? I know Snapchat better than you know Snapchat. And so it is critical for us as parents to make sure that it is our business to know what's out there. If you have a child on social media, you need to be well versed in that social media as well. If you have a child who is accessing, the internet online, that is, working with things through their phone, we have to be aware and recognize and understand what is out there. And if it means going to the adult school at night and taking a computer class in order to learn what's out there, do it. If it means reading up on what parental blocks you can place on phones, let's do it. Because what is happening today, and in this stage, 8 to 14, one of the scariest things that we see happening, and particularly in many of the clients that we see in Cornerstone, is that our children are stumbling upon things online that are truly damaging their psyche. And a lot of times, we give our children the phone and we're like, okay, I trust you. I know you're not going to do anything bad with it. But imagine if 20 years ago, we had given our children a stack of Playboy magazines and told them, don't look at the pictures, only read the articles. I trust that's what you'll do. It would be ridiculous, right? We would never go down that path. And yet with our phones, the things that our children can dig up and find or accidentally stumble upon far exceed even the filth that would be in those magazines. And so we need to raise our level of awareness of what's out there so that we can connect with our children. And basically, when we tell them, look both ways before you cross the street, they'll know that we know what we're talking about. They'll know that we understand what is out there in the world and what they may be experiencing. And so that's incumbent upon each of us to take those steps. Now, speaking in a different tongue is not always just in terms of language or the verbal way of communicating. As we mentioned before, the importance of the nonverbal and the way that we convey messages nonverbally often carry a great deal more weight than the verbal content, than the words themselves. Now, when you take a look at this picture here, you will see from number 1 until number 9, this picture was captured within, or these pictures were captured within 27 seconds. So it was a 27-second conversation that this teenager had with an adult, with someone that was conducting the study. And the face, the expression she was making kept being snapped. So it was like one of those cameras that take the instantaneous photos consistently over and over again. In 27 seconds, this teenager, throughout the conversation, exhibited these 9 different expressions. If you look at each of the expressions, you see how much they say. From number 2, for example, looking like not believing or possibly a bit of sarcasm there, to number 5, where the downward drop of the jaw indicates a bit of negativity or a sense of being unsure, to number 6, where there's evident confusion, all the way down to number 9, which ends in a bit of surprise. And we see that those transitions that are on the face of this young woman are probably transitions that our children in this stage go through consistently. Yet a lot of times we don't notice it. And we don't notice it because we're not looking. We think to ourselves when we ask our children, how are you doing in school? And they say, fine. We're like, okay, that's good. But that fine has so much behind it. How does their voice sound when they say fine? What is the expression on their face? How are they reacting? What is their body language telling you? Are they slumping in their seat or are they sitting straight up? Are their eyes flittering back and forth? What are they saying non-verbally? And how we understand the non-verbal is going to allow us to respond in a reciprocal way. Now, one of the beautiful narratives of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he was at one point in time traveling in the desert on a journey with one of the young companions sitting behind him on the journey. And as they traveled, they were stopped by a woman. And in the narration, in this authentic hadith in Bukhari, we are told that the woman was very beautiful. And so the young man who sat behind the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam turned to look. And so the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, without stopping, his response, the woman was asking about whether or not she could complete the Hajj on behalf of her father who had passed away. While continuing to respond, he gently reached over and turned the chin of the young man. And then the young man looked again. And again the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam turned the young man's head. And then a third time the young man looked, and again the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam turned his head. Non-verbally, through the communication of touch, he sent a message to the young man without first taking the approach to the woman of, oh, you're causing fitna, cover your face. Instead, understanding that the young man was moved by desire, by the lowest base of the nafs, to react to something that he had seen. And so he corrected that movement by gently guiding the chin. And so this is how powerful that power of touch can be. And we spoke in today's earlier session about those languages of love and how touch is one of those languages and how it can be an incredibly important communicative tool with our youngsters. So another reason why we tend to have difficulty understanding and building those solid relationships with our children is because many times we're not asking the right questions. We talked a little bit about how when a child comes into the car, sometimes, your first reaction is, how was school? But that's not what they want to talk about. That's not what is pressing for them or important for them in that moment. So what are the right questions? I think some of these questions up here If you don't know the answer to them of how your child would respond, then you have homework. Find out the answers to these questions. If you were a cartoon character, what cartoon character would you be? If there was a food that you'd never want to taste again, what food would that be? If you had a time machine, what time period would you travel to? Usually our questions are, did you make your bed? Did you clean your room? Did you finish your homework? Did you get an A? Did you stop bothering your sister when I told you to stop bothering your sister? Did you turn off the TV? Did you put away your phone? So a lot of times our conversation with our children in that age of discipline is a conversation that is incredibly functional, that does not scratch beyond the surface of the functional in order to move into the emotional or the empathic. And we understand that hesitancy or that pulling away that our children sometimes experience because they truly feel that we don't understand them, because they feel that we're not taking the time to understand who they are and what they're about. In another beautiful narration of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we are told there was a period of time in which, as he was praying on the hilltop, the kuffar surrounded him and began to pull out the guts from a dead camel and throw the guts and the filth upon his back. Now Fatima radiallahu anha was around the age of 11 or 12, so right in the same stage that we're talking about. And she stood in the doorway of her home and she saw the kuffar throwing the filth upon the back of her father. And so Fatima radiallahu anha, who had the nickname Abiha, the mother of her father, seeing this was very shaken and felt that she must do something. And so she ran up the hill and parted her way through the kuffar and began to remove the filth from the back of the beloved Messenger of Allah. And as she did so, the tears streamed down her cheeks. And she sat next to her father and waited for him to complete the prayer. And when he completed the prayer, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not respond to her by saying, you're a girl, go back home, this is no place for you. He didn't respond for her saying, why did you leave the house? His response was one of empathy and compassion. He wiped her tears and he kissed her forehead. And he said, do not despair, for surely our Lord will allow your father to be victorious. This is a child of 11 or 12 years old. And this is her father, the beloved Messenger of Allah. And their relationship is one that is built on empathy, one that's built on compassion, one that's built on understanding. Not a dismissal of fears, not a rejection of an act that was very important to his daughter in that moment. And so how many times do our children exhibit fear about something? How many times do our children cry tears and our reaction to them is stop crying, don't be a baby? What are you afraid of? This harshness of our tongue can push our children away rather than bringing them closer to us, in where we validate, in where we understand that the tears that they're crying because their friend called them a bad name, that the tears that they're sobbing because everybody went out to some events and they weren't invited. These are valid tears. For them in that moment, it is the most critical and most important part of their life. And for us to dismiss it, saying, it's not important. Come on, you'll find other friends. What's the big deal? You have us. What more do you need? This is not what your child is seeking in that moment. They're seeking emotional validation and empathy that shows that you understand them, that you recognize that this struggle that they're experiencing is a struggle that's very important to them, and that you don't diminish it. You don't take away from it and make them feel belittled, because the world is already doing a good enough job of that. And you're meant to be their seat of security and safety. So why do we struggle with being able to indicate that emotional empathy? One of the languages that we sometimes neglect to discuss is the language of time, and how important the language of time is for our children. Now, there are two different views of time that we can adhere to. There is the polychronic view and the monochronic view. A polychronic view of time means that we tend to view the activity as more important, or we give it more priority than the time itself. Whereas monochronic, we tend to view time as a fixed entity and something that can't change, something that can't waver. And so for our children, for example, at the younger stages, oftentimes, you're telling them, hurry up, we have to go. And they're like taking their time. Look at the trees, look at the flowers. And what's the rush? This is the fitrah that we are born with, to be polychronic, meaning to prioritize the activity, the relationships, the engagement with others more than worrying about time. But we live in a society that is incredibly monochronic, that tells us time is money, time flies. And so how many of you, you don't have to admit it here, but we all have like a separate support group for this, but how many of you have on your Google calendars 9 a.m. doing this, 10 a.m. doing that, 10:15 doing this, 10:30 doing that, right? And this is what society has encouraged us to do, monochronic. Everything has a time, everything has to be rush, rush. And in that process, our children, as they transition from that 0 to 7, that age of fitrah, when they are still polychronic and are moving into the young adulthood stage, but they're stuck in those middle years, 8 to 14, they're still trying to comprehend where they fit into that scale of being polychronic and monochronic. And many times when they look to their parents and their parents prioritize so many other things in life, they can feel that sense of distance. They can feel that the language that the parent is speaking to them is, you're not as important as this pot of biryani that I have to make. You're not as important as the laundry that has to be put in. You're not as important as my work that I have to stay up on the laptop hours for even after I come home from. And that language of time can often speak even louder than words because it is nonverbal and it conveys a great deal. So ensure that we prioritize in a way that allows our children to recognize their value and their worth in our lives, because they feel it and they recognize when they're not in that priority. Now, many times when I ask people if they had an 8th day in the week, what would they do with it? What would you do if you had an 8th day? If you woke up one week and you were gifted with this 8th day, what would you do on the 8th day? Sleep. That's usually the number one answer. Sleep, catch up on work, finish the laundry, clean out the closets, right? And when you look at that idea that even if there was this bonus time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed upon us, we would utilize that day very much in the same way as we've utilized all the other days of the week. And there wouldn't be much difference. And so we see that even if we are given that time, we don't necessarily have extra barakah in the time. And we look at the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam and we see that there was the same 24-hour period in a day that the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam and the companions experienced. But the difference was, at that time, entire cities were built, generations' lives were changed. And they didn't have the disease of busyness, the disease of like, I'm busy, how are you doing? I'm busy, so busy, right? Because there was barakah in their time. Not that they had an extra day of the week, not that they had an extra hour of the day. And that barakah in our time is what we've lost because, remember that very first slide that we talked about in the first session? Because we have lost sight of linking our purpose in our actions to that sense of spirituality. There is a beautiful hadith on the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam where he told the companions, if there was a river in front of your door and you washed in it 5 times a day, how would you feel? They said, we'd feel very clean. And he said to them, your salah is like that river in which it cleanses your heart 5 times a day. Imagine if we changed our perspective with our families, with our children, with our homes, where we anchored our time to our salah, where we thought to ourselves, I will wake up for tahajjud, and after tahajjud, I will complete that work that needs to be done while the children are still asleep, so I do not cut into the time of the family. I will pray Fajr, and after Salat al-Fajr, I will prepare the lunches or the snacks or whatever it is with my partner's help. Of course, I don't think we have marriage sessions this time, but if we do, we talk a lot about that. But, husband and wife together, working hand in hand, after Fajr, we're going to do this. So that when the children are awakened, there isn't that sense of rushing. And then imagine you tell yourself, okay, between Fajr and Dhuhr, this is what I will accomplish. Between Dhuhr and Asr, this inshallah is what I will do. Between Asr and Maghrib, this is what I'll do. And between Maghrib and Isha, it is time for my family, uninterrupted, devices put away, because you've organized your life in a way that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is how we bring back that barakah. This is how in our lives, sometimes you'll look at people and you'll be like, you do so much, how can you do so much? And truly, this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and from His barakah in that person's time. Not that that person has more time or has 17 maids taking care of the house or, has a spouse that does everything. It's simply that when we anchor our lives to that love of Allah and we create that sense of organization in our lives linked to our salah and our ibadah, that the barakah comes back in and that our children notice that and recognize that that is there. Now, one of the things that's important to remember as we raise our children is that we often put a great deal of emphasis on their grades, on what they're doing in school, on how they're achieving. But the reality is that a truly successful child is the child that will make dua for us after our passing. Is the child who, as an amana, as a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will be able to return to that point on the day of judgment when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks, what did you do with that trust that I gave you? And we will be able to say that we raised them in the way that was most pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we do that by focusing on their character, on teaching them the adab and the akhlaq through the seerah of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now, from the age of 8 to 14, this is the age again where the children are thirsty for role models that may exist outside of their home, where they're seeking that sense of support, that sense of knowing that the world around them is bigger than just their own home. And this is the age where making sure that the role models are at the ready. That it's not just the seerah of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that they're studying and understanding so that they can truly love him more than they love themselves. But it is the stories of the companions. It is the ahadith that have guided us. And it is the ayahs in the Quran by which you want them to live their lives. And we bring it in a way, again in the morning we talked a little bit about the difference between rote memorization and critical thinking. We bring it to them in a way where they can understand, in a tongue that they can understand. So if we are speaking to them constantly in the native tongue, in the language that we're most comfortable with, understand that they may comprehend the language, but they may not comprehend the tongue. If your children were born and raised in this country, then the way that they understand the world will be different than the way that you understand it if you've immigrated from a different country. And so when we convey the stories of the Prophet ﷺ, when we convey the meaning of what the world looks like from an Islamic perspective, we also need to understand what it looks like from their perspective. What does it look like in their school? What does it look like? What are they engaging with their friends? What are they watching on television? What are they seeing on their phones? And that's how we can begin to develop a greater sense of empathy and emotional intelligence that is linked to ibadah in our children. And again, it goes back to who we are as parents, and it goes back to the role that we play and the messages that we send. So practice what you preach. This is an incredibly important one, because many times we'll tell our kids, you're always on your phone, put your phone away. And we tell it to them, you're always on your phone, put your phone away, right? While we ourselves are glued to our devices. We're like, oh, but it's different. I'm doing it for work. It's different. I have to check my email. It's different. I have to text so-and-so because there's this program, and it's not different. For the child who sees you as a parent constantly glued to devices, then it becomes very difficult to practice what we call planned abandonment, which means planning to abandon those devices and those things that suck the time out of the day in a way that is most productive and beneficial. So in every home, there should be a central charging station. And there should be a time at which all devices are locked into the charging station. And this means mom and dad too. You cannot say, oh, but it's okay, I can take it up in the bedroom with me and go pass the time. No, if you are going to tell your children, and you should tell your children, no devices in bedrooms ever, then you had better make sure that you are not taking your devices into the bedrooms. If you are going to tell your children that 9 p.m. is the cutoff, no more screen time on your phone or on your laptop or your iPad at that point, then your screens and your laptops and your devices need to be plugged in at that point too. And remember what we said about organizing our days according to our salah. You know that big paper that's due that you need to submit for work? You know that grading that you have to do as a teacher? You know whatever it is that you have to access, those emails you have to send? After the kids are asleep, wake up for tahajjud. Pray 2 rak'ahs. And I guarantee you it will take you less time to complete that work, that assignment, whatever it was that you had to do, than if you had stayed up late at night after the deadline for plugging in phones and laptops and things to do it then. And teach your children those habits. So as they enter high school and college, when they say, oh, but I have this big paper and it's due, I have this big test to study for, let them know that there is, after that deadline, whether it's 9 o'clock or 9:30 or, I encourage 8:30, but some families say that's too early. But, whatever time your deadline is, encourage your children that after they seek that rest, after they step away, and studies have shown minds are less productive after they've been overtaxed and after reaching a period of time where they are overly tired. So teach them that it's okay, they can wake up and pray Fajr, and within that half hour after Fajr, they'll be able to complete the assignment, they'll be able to study for the test. And this is how we develop those habits in our children that can help them better understand how to be the best person that they can be and how to build a better relationship with us. All right, speaking of relationships, many times in the process of tarbiyah and raising our children, we also forget another incredibly important relationship. One, the relationship between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the relationship with our Creator. Two, the relationship with our spouse. Three, the relationship with our own parents and our in-laws. And four, the relationship with our community. Because as much as that fifth one, relationship with children, is important, all those other relationships are critical as well. And so, you'll see in the image even the child who is kind of hiding from the family. It's because the parents have neglected their relationship, have not put in that effort to build a sense of oneness or unity with each other. And so the child is affected by that. And so it's incredibly important that we nurture our own relationships, because we can't help others if we don't first help ourselves. And we help ourselves by seeking that help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, just in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward a little bit. Okay, so let's just go to the do's and the don'ts of the teen and the tween years. So this is the age, again, we talked about discipline. And we talked about the example of how to discipline with kindness, the example of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam gently guiding the youth rather than scolding or yelling. So ensuring that when we discipline with love and not anger. Early in the morning, we talked about the hadith of do not become angry, do not become angry, do not become angry. Our anger can be such a damaging factor in our relationships, and particularly with our children. We have young people who, again, have reached a point where they've denounced Islam, have reached a point where they've done things that are, unspeakable at age 15, 16, 17, 18. And again, when you ask them why, you see that there is a distance between them and their parents, that they feel that their parents, when they had been disciplining them, they disciplined them with harshness. They didn't discipline with love. When they had been disciplining them, it was constant yelling. It was constant abuse in terms of putting them down and criticizing them. So we have to check ourselves and ensure that when we feel a sense of anger at something that a child has broken, at something that we find online, an email that was sent, a message that was posted, at something that we learn from a friend's parents who come back and say, do you know what your kid did? I saw your child in the mall and XYZ. In that moment where we react with anger, because again, we are human, and the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam gives us our guidance because he knows and anticipates what we may encounter and what we may feel. And when we feel that moment of anger, that moment of disappointment, that is not the time to discipline. That is the time to calm ourselves down and bring ourselves to a place of rationale, where we can look at the situation, understand what happened, and speak to our child in a way where they recognize that the love is still there, that the care is still there, but that there are consequences for the action. And, we've talked a little bit about the screen time. We've talked about the boundaries. The importance of friends is something else that we want to talk about. because we said that this is the age again where friends play a critical role. Now, teaching moderation rather than extremes. Many times we find ourselves in a position, and particularly in those middle school years, where everything is no. Mama, can I go to this friend's house? No. Can I go to this birthday party? We don't celebrate birthdays. Can I go to this function at school? No. And when no becomes the absolute extreme, where that is constantly your response, that can be enough to push a child to seek out yes somewhere else, to act in a way that is detrimental and try to just hide that so that you don't find out about it, which eventually we know you'll find out. Now, there was a period of time where the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam was approached by 3 men. And the 3 men came to him and said, we want to be the best in our deen. And so the first man said, I will pray all of the nights and I will never sleep. And the second man said, I will fast all of the days and I'll never break my fast. And the third man said, I will never marry. And so in the narration, in the description of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam's reaction, we are told that the beloved messenger of Allah had a very white forehead. And on his forehead there was a blue vein, that when he would get agitated or upset, the blue vein would throb. And in this narration, we are told that in that moment, as the men continued to say, I will do this and I will do that, the vein began to throb. And the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam turned to the 3 men and he said, I pray some of the nights and I sleep some of the night. I fast some of the days and I break my fast, and I marry. So how can you be better than that? And the reason why the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam showed agitation at this approach is because our deen is not a deen of extremes. Our deen is a deen of moderation. It is a deen where the halal far outweighs the haram. But to talk to our children today, many times they will respond and say, everything is haram in my house. It's all haram. It's always no. And so this is where we have to ask ourselves, what alternatives are we giving so that we can truly practice a deen of moderation with our children? So for example, a few years ago, we had several young women in our community who really wanted to go to their prom. And they felt like, it's no big deal. We're going to go together as friends. And, it's not like we're going to date. So what's the big deal? And so as a community, we thought about it. And we came up with something called a MORP, which is prom spelled backwards, But it was the idea of having a gathering for the girls. And we had asked the girls, what is it that makes you want to go to this prom? Remember, we had talked about the age of advisement earlier on in the morning. And so the response was, well, it'll be fun. We'll be with our friends. It'll be a chance to get dressed up. And so we looked at their checklist and we said, we can do this. And we can do this in an environment that is not displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the first year we had the MORP, we had about 25 young women who came. The second year we had the MORP, we had 125 come. The last year that we just had the MORP, we had 400 young women attend from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. And this was now a tradition that the Muslim youth, the Muslim young women, are excited to be a part of. And so if we provide alternatives, we will find that there is so much in the way of halal that we can offer our children that does not have to make them think that our deen is a deen of extremes. So because I want to leave time for our question and answer, I'm just going to quickly finish up the last 2 slides, and then, as I said, we'll continue our conversation in the evening session regarding the next stage of tarbiyah. So choosing friends wisely. Now, in this stage, our children may feel like they are way past the stage of play dates, of you saying, oh, Muhammad is a nice boy, or Amina is a nice girl, let's invite them over. This is the stage where they want to feel like they can choose their own friends. But as parents, again, we are there to give our children guidance. We are there to direct them towards the friends that will be the most beneficial, inshallah. And we're all familiar with the hadith an Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, where he tells us a friend can be like a blacksmith maker, or a friend can be like a perfume maker. And if you are close to the blacksmith, even if you don't work in the blacksmith, some of the soot and the bellows from his work will cling to you. And if you are close to a perfume maker, some of the sweet scents of the perfume will cling to you. And so for our children, it is our role, our duty as their guardians, as the ones who are entrusted with this amana, to facilitate avenues where they can meet the perfume maker, where they can engage with those in atmospheres that are conducive to their deen, conducive to their character. And that might mean that your house is going to be the house where children congregate in. That might mean that you may have to take some time away from things that need to be get done in the home, take some time off of work so that you can be the one that takes the children, or that takes your child along with a community of other children to an event that develops, the Boy Scout troop in your town, that develops the Girl Scout troop, that coaches the soccer team, that coaches the basketball team. And again, we go back to that, but there's no time. Think back to that barakah that you can find in time when you organize your day in the right way. And I promise you, inshallah, you'll see that barakah and you'll find the time to do so. And then finally, with the last slide that leads us into the beginning of what we'll talk about in the next session, the importance of companionship. We're living in a time where the term companion has really lost its meaning. Nobody calls their friends companions anymore. Yet at the time of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba were just that. They were companions. They weren't just friends. They weren't acquaintances. They were companions in that their hearts were linked with one another, in that they cared so much about one another that they cared not just about the dunya but about the akhirah. And that is the mark of a true friend. And so think about, who are your children's companions? Not just friends. Who are those that they look to emulate? Who are those that they spend the most time with? Who are those that when they interact with, they feel like, yes, this is the person that I want to be with and I want to be like? Who are those that surround your children that they would want to be with in Jannah, inshallah? And being able to create those moments of companionship is critical for parents. If it means you have to drive a couple of hours in order to have the children attend a certain event, do it. If it means that the Sunday school that you feel is, has the companions or the friends that would be most conducive to your children, go to that far Sunday school instead of the one right next door. Because in the end, again, that's what we'll be asked about. What did we facilitate for our children? And unfortunately today, and we're going to delve into this a bit more in the night session, the concept of companionship or closeness with someone has unfortunately become sexualized. And this is why we have a lot of who feel affinity towards someone of the same gender, who immediately jump to what society has told them, well, then this must mean that you're homosexual. Then this must mean that you have same-sex attraction. But when we look at the love that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam had for the companions, for the Sahaba, we see that there is an empathy and a shared connection. And yet today, it has become perverted. It has become this idea that you cannot have a close connection with a friend unless it is intimate. And this is what we have to reclaim as part of our Islamic narrative. This is what we have to reclaim as part of our youth's identity. That the concept of companionship is that through this world, as we travel together as travelers in this dunya, there are companions beside you whose hearts are connected. That has nothing to do with the perverted way that the world today chooses to look at the idea of close connections. So with that, Jazakumullahu khair, I will end this session here so that we have time for question and answer.
Jazakallah, Dr. Suzy Ismail, for providing insight on how parents and children can develop their relationship better through nonverbal actions, which carry more weight than verbal words, and organizing your life that is pleasing towards Allah to add more barakah to your time in order to spend more time with your family. And with that, I'll open the floor to questions and answers. We'll go ahead and take a few. So if you have any, please feel free to ask. Don't be shy. Oh, we have a question over here.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dr. Suzy, just short answer. I have teenager boys, twin boys. They are around 16, I think. I'm not sure. Okay, one of them I sent to the Islamic boarding school, and one of them they are still studying in a public school. But the problem, both of them are the same. When both of them coming home, they never, there's almost no time for the family to interact, just busy with the gadget. So the quality time is very less. So do you have any suggestion? Even we just kept the gadget, and they still find another gadget and still find another laptop. And when we kept the mobile, the cell phone, they play with the laptop. When we keep the laptop, they still with the game with the TV. It's always changing. Technology is really amazing, but for us, this is a very negative side. Thank you.
All right, so this is an important question in terms of how do we implement those basically boundaries in terms of devices, in terms of gadgets, and particularly when they've entered the teenage year, around 16 or so. And so, again, maybe at the younger stages, we are still in a position of authority with our children where we can say, nope, no more gadgets at this time. You know, I'm taking them away. You're not going to have them. Today, we see 16, 17-year-olds where when their phone is taken away because they've acted in a way that's not appropriate or something, they have so many other ways to access that same device. So they get the phones that you throw away, the Go phone, for example. Their friend will give them an old iPod that was broken and that they just fixed up and they can use it. They'll find other ways. And so removing the physical device is not necessarily going to be the most productive. Instead, what we need to remove is the desire that is linked to that physical device. What is your child gaining out of being on the device all of the time that they're missing out on in the day-to-day? Do they feel that when they're connected to the phone that they know what's going on in their friends' lives and that's why they have to check Snapchat a million times a day? Are they seeking affirmation? Remember, we spoke about the language of affirmation earlier, in that when they post something, they keep checking, how many likes did I get? And if they didn't get enough likes, then they post something else. And if they didn't get enough likes on that, then they'll unfollow their friend because how could their friend not like their picture, right? Is that what they're seeking? Is it a form of attention seeking? Are they retreating into the device because they're not happy with what the real world looks like? And I know these are very deep psychological questions, and oftentimes our kids will respond and just be like, I don't know, I'm just doing it because everyone else is doing it. I'm bored. I'm doing it because I'm bored, right? But where is the root of that boredom? Again, you know, when we see that sense of an idle mind, a mind that doesn't have a lot that's to work with, then what winds up happening is they get pulled towards that which makes them even more idle, right? And there's a beautiful, in the Quran, there's a beautiful verse of when Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam made that dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect his children and the future generations from idol worship. And idol worship is the IDOL, worship of statues, but really today we see idol worship, IDLE, the type of worshiping of wasting time, of not focusing on something that is present or that is going to bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So number one, rather than trying to battle the physical object, we have to dig a little deeper and understand the emotional. So when your child is spending, you know, an extended time on their phone, sit beside them. Say, hey, can I see what you're doing? What is it that, and you know right away, they're going to be like, what? It's nothing, right? And they'll put it away. But encourage them. Say, look, I'm not disciplining you. I just want to know, like, what's so interesting. And what are they doing? Is it social media that's occupying them? Are they playing Clash of Clans? Are they watching videos of Fortnite because you told them they can't play Fortnite on the Xbox anymore? You know, and Fortnite is a whole other issue in terms of how it's been designed. Interestingly enough, the game Fortnite, it's just come to be revealed that the designers of Fortnite spent years studying, and if you have, you know, teenage or tween boys, you probably know what Fortnite is. They spent years studying understand why people get addicted to gambling and how they get addicted. And they replicated the same stimuli that would cause the response indicators in the mind to react to the game in the same way that gamblers react to gambling games, essentially, to slot machines or poker or things like that. And with cell phones and computers and all sorts of things that we have today in technology, it's very similar, that the addiction begins in a way where it's this sense of, what's next? What am I going to miss out on? Let me just check one more time. Let me just post one more thing. Let me just engage in this online environment in one more way. And so when we sit with our children and ask them to share with us what they're doing, again, without necessarily disciplining in that moment, without saying, you're always on your phone, astaghfirullah, you never want to have family time. First, understand it. If your child is obsessed with playing Fortnite, and it's definitely an addiction, and we have ways that we can try to wean them off of it, but tell them, I want to play the game with you. Can I see how you're playing? Can I sit with you and understand it more? Again, remember, what is a priority in your child's life needs to be something that you view as a priority as well, so that you can reach them on it. So with your 16-year-olds, I would say, when they come back home, sit with them. As soon as you see them on their phone, sit beside them, say, hey, can I just see what you're doing? Even if they hide it, even if they push it away, persist, not in a negative way, but in a way, a joking way, a way, again, speak their tongue. Hey, come on, I kind of want to know what's going on. I want to be a cool, hip dad too. Show me what's out there, See if they'll engage in that way. It's likely that in the beginning they won't, because everything takes time to begin to develop that type of a habit. But little by little, they will get there. And then set those boundaries, set those parameters. So you want to tell them, as we said, devices being plugged in, this is a universal rule and should apply for the entire family, including everyone who's here. So put those limits. Let them know, dinner time, no phones, no laptops, no devices. Everyone plugs in, including mom and dad. Nighttime at 8:30, everything gets plugged in. But what's the alternative? If you're taking away their devices at 8:30, what are you giving them instead? And so this is what you want to begin to develop at home. At 8:30 on Friday nights, maybe it's going to be game night. You're going to play Scrabble as a family. You're going to play Monopoly as a family, And you can mix that in, we're going to read a hadith together, and then we're going to play Monopoly, We're going to play Scrabble, and then we're going to listen to this verse from the Quran. There can be that mixing and that engagement. Build that sense of community. Start a halaqah in your community. And the halaqah can be something simple where the teenagers are the ones leading. In our community, alhamdulillah, we have 2 different gatherings. We have a khatm group in which we're 5 families, and each family has to complete a juz of the Quran, and then we meet at the end of the month and we recite Surah Yasin as a completion of the Quran. Now the children, because they've had this in their lives since they were younger, they all know they have their segment of the Quran they have to read, and they have to be done with it before the khatm. And we have another group, which was the halaqah for hadith, where each child from the family has to essentially research one of the 40 hadith, memorize it, and present it to the adults at the gathering. So this gives the children that sense of empowerment, which we're going to talk about again a little bit later on tonight, but a sense of identity and a sense of confidence. We talk a lot about Toastmaster and sending our kids to places where they can improve their public speaking. We don't have to do that. We have so many avenues where we can do so while implementing that sense and that connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
I think we have time for just one more question.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Suzy. My name is Ibrahim. I have 3 daughters. My question for you is about the prom. That is very interesting. How you put the prom concept in Islamic perspective, but then not so extremes toward to your daughter. And then you say early that you create the program called MORP. How you start the program since some of these girls, they go to the different public school and they are Muslim, and how you like in practical, what the first step you do. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, great question. So again, whenever I talk about the prom in different communities, a lot of time people will say, oh, what's the big deal? It's just a gathering of friends. It just, ends their senior year. But I went to school here. I remember what the prom means. And it means a lot more than just a symbolic, graduation. It's much more intense than that. And what surrounds it, and particularly, with what's happening today and what our children are taught and what they access today, what surrounds it is much more sinister than what may appear or what your children may try to put forth there. So from an Islamic perspective, why would we want to place our children in an environment that we know is not going to draw them nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when there are so many other ways that we can develop situations and things that they can gather with friends and enjoy that time where it is something that's pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So creating a gathering, and it doesn't have to be something extravagant. And alhamdulillah, this program kind of grew over the years, but it began with a very simple gathering we rented out a very small firehouse that I think it was like $200 or something. Every girl contributed, just like when they would, if you go to the prom, I think it's like $75 a ticket or $100. Every child paid like $20 or whatever it was. We catered food. The girls bought dresses. They, got their hair done, but they remained within that context of a Muslim gathering, of a gathering of sisters together. And we started the prom with actually recitation of Quran. We continued with playing some nasheeds. We played games. We did things together that gave the children that sense of, wow, this is something special. And when their friends in school were talking about how they were going to get their hair done or their nails done or their dresses or whatnot, these girls didn't feel left out. And for them, that was the essence of prom. That's what they wanted to get out of it. Now, yes, a lot of these girls go to different high schools and attend different programs, but this is like that anticipation, something that they can build towards, knowing that they have their own party for them that they can attend is what kind of helped move it in the right direction. I think there was one more question up here.
Sure, we'll go ahead and take in one last question. It was in the front.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, sister, for the very spark speech about parenting and how you can maintain your relationship with the twins and teens. That's what the title called. Now, so as a family, we try to introduce this no gadgets during family dinner time. There's no gadgets, right? The reason, and we always just try to put reasoning behind it. It's like there's a barakah in our food. The food is from Allah, respect those, right? And then it's been going on, it's good, so we maintain that habit, and then we took it to another level. So there's no gadgets every night from 6 to 9. Okay, it was good, it's been going on for a few months, and all of a sudden, we invited one family to have a dinner in our home. And then what happened, the dinner was at 6. And all of a sudden, all the families just putting gadgets on the table, and then my kid is like, why they can do it? Why I cannot do it? Why we are different with the other families? So the issue is now, we try to put some cultures or some values in the family, but now we are dealing with another family which has a different values or different thoughts of in maintaining the gadgets and also relationship within the families or in the dinner table, for example. So any thoughts on that? Thank you.
So Jazakallah khair for asking that question. This is a question that we get quite frequently, and particularly from parents of children who are enrolled in Islamic schools. Because they will say, it's easy for us to say when the child is in public school, oh, they're not Muslim, that's why they do that. But when in the Islamic school, there are Muslim families who are living their lives in ways that maybe don't appeal to us as a family, or are following guidelines that are different than our guidelines, how can we tell our children not to follow them? Because these are Muslims, So how do we tell them? And in your case, this is a family that you're friends with that came to your home. How do you tell your children, well, they're different? And the reality is that they will experience many different cultures, many different rules, many different ways of families interacting. And so I don't know how young your children are, but from a young age, we do want to guide our children to understand that our family unit has its own set of rules, and that each family unit has their differences. So I would say, regardless of what age your children are, go back to those verses of Surah Ar-Rum. Read those verses with the children. Explain to them what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means when He reminds us in verse 20 that we've been created from different parts of the earth and we've dispersed. Remind them what it means that, we have different tongues and different colors. It means that our interactions, even as families, will be different. And what works for your family may not work for someone else's family. So if that family is comfortable with using gadgets gadgets on the table, it's not the rule for your family, but that's something that they figure out together. That's not something that can apply universally. And I think the earlier on that we develop in our children a sense of tolerance and understanding that not everyone is the same, the better it'll be for us, entirely in the world, because that is the truth, that not every family will be the same, and the rules and the guidelines will differ, and they need to be able to adhere to the rules of their family without comparing to the rules of other families.
All right, Jazakallah, Dr. Suzy, again for being here today and sharing how to develop a better relationship between parents and children. I'm going to go ahead and close the session. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Thank you for the audience member for attending. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.